Hmm.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jools Sampson, and I'm here with Wigsten, who is the owner of 360 Degrees Mongolia and the founder of Nomadic Journeys. I own Reclaim Yourself Retreats. We run yoga retreats and wellness adventures in wild places, and I'm currently based in London. So I wanted to give you a bit of background about myself. I joined the Transformational Travel Council in 2019, and I did their design course, Transform Design course in spring 2020, and I'm now one of their UK ambassadors. Normally, we would be running around 10 yoga retreats a year in remote wilderness places like Norway, Panama, the Azores, and of course, Mongolia. So the transformational design course was quite a powerful experience for me. It led me to redesign much of my business. I'd been operating for about 15 years before I found the Transformational Travel Council, and I thought it was a really good fit for me. I was thinking I design transformational experiences for my guests, but when I did the course, I realised there was so much more to it. And of all the trips that I was designing at the time, the only trip that I was doing that really reflected transformational travel principles in full was the Mongolia one. And the reason for that is, in my opinion, because Jan Wigsten and his Mongolian team have created the perfect location and set up for transformational trips. So I've been running retreats in Mongolia for about 5 years. Jan and I have known each other for a little bit longer. And actually, it was through Jan that I discovered the TTC. So we are TTC allies, and we are here today to talk together about transformational travel in action. So I'd like to introduce you now to Jan. Jan, tell us a bit about yourself. I know that you've been doing many, many interesting projects around the world, and we could talk for hours about that. But for today, could you please tell me what you have set up in Mongolia?
Okay, let's skip the rest of the world. My Mongolia relation is quite long. It's 4 decades now. So I came out there in 1980 as a young tour leader. And later on, when the Berlin Wall fell down, in 1992, I organized a trip for Scandinavian Geographic Society out to Mongolia and ended up starting the first joint venture in tourism of the country. And it was all from the scratch. As you know, Mongolia was part of the USSR bloc, and it was hanging there. There was no relations to China, Korea, or Japan, or United States. It was the Soviet Union, really. And since then, we have evolved over many, many years as an inbound tour operators, basically. There was no infrastructure in Mongolia. There's very little roads, and it's half the size of Europe. It's very seasonal. And it's very cold in the winter times. It actually lies in the Arctic. And around 2014, we started to drift away with different market segments. We did fly fishing, we did horse riding, birding. I got on my desk a lot of high-end travel, and because there is no infrastructure, it's high-end adventure. Sometimes the only luxury is the price, so to speak. And we developed that since 2014, and since 2018, I'm no longer owner of Nomadic Journeys. We split up in fly fishing ownership, and we have the tour operator ownership and the 360 Degrees Mongolia ownership that is running now for the past few years with only high net worth adventure travelers, so to speak. So this is my relation with Mongolia. So I live there also. I have a Mongolian wife, and I'm a resident in both Sweden and Mongolia. Yeah. And we haven't been there since October 2019 because of the pandemic. We're sitting ducks.
I was going to say, you've been stuck in Sweden for a while now, haven't you? So yeah, you have a very long history and a very deep understanding of what's happening in Mongolia. So I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. I would like to pick up on quite a hot topic that back in 2019, before we were all talking about the pandemic, the real big topic of conversation was climate change. And in the travel industry, I think this was becoming a big conversation. And I know that during the pandemic, when lots of us haven't been able to operate, many travel companies, myself included, have used the time to assess their operations, look at their impact on the environment, do an audit. And there's a lot of talk when we come out of the pandemic and we start to re-travel, that people want to do this in a more regenerative and sustainable way. And this is very much a big part of how transformational travel, this is a big aspect of transformational travel. So I thought I would pick up on that. Me personally, I've kind of re-pivoted my business, and I've started to look at how all of my trips can have a positive impact. And it's very easy for me to write on my biography or on my website, we do positive impact travel. And the only reason I can do that is from working with people like you. So I would really like to delve in a bit more deeply and ask you, what does that actually mean in Mongolia? When I say I'm doing a positive impact trip to Mongolia, for you working in Mongolia and living in Mongolia, what do you see as the positive impact of travel, and what are some of the challenges?
Well, the challenges have been many over the years, of course. So you're in the outbound end, and I, in this case, in the inbound end, and we actually have to walk our talk. And Mongolia lends itself quite well to this, because it's very seasonal. So, you know, you wouldn't have any over-tourism problems hardly anywhere in the country. There is slightly, of course. And everything was collapsed when we started. So we evolved a lot before you came to us, like 10, 15 years. And all Mongolians had a Soviet kind of disposition to service. It was a monopoly, a tourism monopoly, the first time I came out there. And I just looked at the opportunities of how we could blend in with our operations in the society. And 30-40% of all Mongolians, they are herders, they are pastoralists, they are nomads, true nomads. It's the biggest nomadic society left on earth, I guess. And in order to have happy staff, we need to have happy clients. So the first thing lies in trip design, I think. I usually did the trip design on all our trips in the first 10, 15 years. And we slow paced it so that the locals had the time to meet us. They're quite, you know, there's not a lot of people coming along in Mongolia and just dip in and have a quick cup of coffee and go away. It takes time to soften up strike a conversation, especially when you do not share a language and so on. So we started out with slow-paced travel, and instead of driving jeeps around the countryside, having tired staff, we started with yak treks, you know, walking in nature with nomads and bringing a yurt along, you know, one of those gears, and tents and a cook, and we were totally self-sufficient, and we walked for a few days in the northern parts of the country. And in that way, my partners, the locals, the nomads, they become exposed to what tourism is. And it was my role to catch visitors or guests that were compatible with our values. And that lies in the trip design, how we sell things, how we present it. So we opted to go in a different route. Our camps that we were forced to develop, because all other camps that were too big. I wanted camps that had only 13 to 14 units of yurts. So we have these yurts camps. We would put them off grid, not near the grid. So what it meant is that it's more work, and more work generates more people. So I guess what happened there? Did I do something? Yes. Sorry for this.
You're fine.
So we chose, on my recommendation, we started a labor-intensive business model in the least populated country on earth. You can compare Mongolia with Namibia. Namibia is the second least populated country on earth. It lies next to South Africa, right? And it has also very little people, but they have roads, they have better climate than we have. And most people there speak English. In Mongolia, they don't. It's in the Arctic, there is no roads. So it was really a challenge. So in order to do that, we had to sell at a little higher price point because the tax on labor is quite high in Mongolia. Funny, the income tax is low, but the labor tax that we have to pay for people's pensions, because they ran out of the pensions by 1990 when the Berlin Wall came down. So in order to do that, we chose a path where we would not be the cheapest on the market. We would be a little bit more pricey, but instead you would have an immersive experience with nomads. And I think we evolved through that kind of school. And after that, we started with fly fishing, and then came all the conservation aspects. You know, how do we fish? You know, yeah, it's catch and release. You know, how do we take care of the river so that there is no poaching on the river or overfishing taking place? And when we opted for that, and we agreed in the teams that this would be a good way to go, because we know this. So the nomadic skill sets is not hospitality. We wouldn't teach nomads how to, you know, clean rooms or clean toilets or cook food for our guests. They would do what they were already very good at. And that was, you know, assembling yurts, moving them, horse riding and stuff like that. So we just walked and we did horse riding. I led the first horse riding trip myself at the time with the air stewardess from Scandinavian Airlines. It was very interesting because I could hardly ride. I learned how to ride in Mongolia on wooden saddles. So we have to adapt to the society that's already there. And then I found out also that it was quite different. You would think that we have one business model since it's one company, but the nomads, they choose to work differently with us, because in some areas you have the Gobi, that's kind of a desert, right? So in the desert, the nomads, they have to move maybe 15, 20 times in a year because the pasture is poor. So they have a lot of work and they're far away. And those kind of nomads, they would interact with us. They were very keen on, everyone was keen on cash in the early years, of course. But in later years, when they have enough income on from their livestock herding, then they're not so interested to work with us. So that's not against money, I mean. And in some areas, sorry. What's that? Sorry for that. Mm-hmm. And in some places, they were very entrepreneurial. And it depended on the social fabric of each place. So in some places near Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital, we would have an influx of migrants, like internal migrants, nomads that would move closer to the city in order to sell their products easier to the market. And the social fabric of those places, they would be uprooted. Only 140 kilometers south of the city, which is not far, the social fabric was intact. Why? Because the winter conditions very hard. And those nomads there, they would have something called zud, the winter disasters, and they have to move much more in the winter. So they're much more hardworking, and they had quite high, big number of livestock. They were the most entrepreneurial. So our business model became to adapt to the local livelihood strategies of each place that we operated, which I found, I really learned something there. And that was really interesting takeaway also for my consulting jobs in the winter. Sometimes in Africa or South America, I would bring those takeaways with me. And then we chose a model to optimize rather than maximize. In tourism, maximization, to maximize and have more people or more numbers is not always, because the quality of the visitor experience goes down. This is what happened in Barcelona and Venice and all these places. We know about it. We are a supply-oriented industry. So we need to accommodate growth in the place. So we would have to increase the yield instead, so we could pay the salaries to all the people that we employ. And when we have more people employed, it was easier for everyone to do a good work. And we would also curb the staff rotation. That is a challenge for many Mongolian companies. It's just a peak time in July, August. So we were able to give jobs in May and June, because we had bird watchers in May, and in September, October, we would have fly fishermen after some years. So it took quite a while to adapt what I've learned in other places, running tourism or working as a tour guide or tour producer. And it evolved very well over the years, I think. And conservation strategies is another big thing, of course. If we work with things like snow leopards or Argali sheep or wolverines, we need to look at conservation partnerships. So sometimes we have quite complex partnerships, but it is, to be frank, it is easier to deliver sustainability outside the national parks. Why? Because the national parks are owned and run by the government, and the government is underfunded, and the Ministry of Environment is also underfunded. So they're not great partners, and they are prone to, after an election, they will change the park director. So they are kind of unsustainable partners. So it's better, we have better results, community benefit results outside the parks, mostly. And where you have gone, Jools, you have gone to 2 protected areas, but one of them, Ichtnart, is younger than the other. So we were able to have a little bit better results in Ichtnart on community development. And in Jalman Meadows, where you have been, there are mostly migrant people around there. Maybe you didn't notice that because the nomads look all the same, but they are not related to each other. So they like to work against money. That's it.
Right. I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
To me, this is absolutely fascinating, and I think it really shows the depth of what goes into creating like a tourist experience that has, I sit on the outside from the other side going, when I go to Mongolia, excuse me, with my guests, my trip is having a positive impact. But the only reason that I can do that is because of you and what you've created. And I think what you've just described is such an eye-opener. Like every time I speak to you, I have this like, oh my God, there's so much going on. And like you said, Mongolia is not an over-touristed place. It's somewhere, but you've taken years and years, and you've been working very closely with your Mongolian partners and with the herders and with the nomads, and you've learned so much. And I find that fascinating, because from the outside, we just come in and like I said, it's the only trip I do where I can say there are all these different principles around transformational travel that you've been doing them for years, Jan.
Thank you. But from the beginning, I was a baby in Mongolia,
Yeah.
I could do nothing without local partners.
Of course, yeah.
So you have to have a case, a convincing case,
yeah.
what we're going to do together, right?
Absolutely. And I think I would love to talk about this forever, but we do need to bring this to a close. But I would like to have one more conversation, coming back to how we started talking about this. I have obviously organised a yoga retreat in Mongolia, I believe the first one, definitely from the UK coming in. And for me, the location is amazing. The experience is amazing, but it's really the cultural immersion and the connection that we have with your team that makes our trips so transformational and wonderful. So one aspect I just wanted to touch on that I think is like a mutually positive experience is how we have managed to create Yogi vegan menus in Mongolia, one of the biggest meat eating nations that we work in. When I'm designing a retreat, this is often a challenging part, because generally on a yoga retreat, people would expect vegetarian or vegan food. So I do not want to go into a country and impose that. It has to be something that we do together. So I really love you to share with our audience what happened when we turned up and said that we wanted to do a vegan menu.
Yeah, that was an interesting experience, because we evolved even more with that experience. At that time, I mean, treks, walking and moving things, and horse riding, these are skill sets that our Mongolians are far better than anyone else. But for fly fishing, that doesn't come natural to them. So we were already experienced with fly fishing and quite demanding clientele. So we already had quite good cooks. I don't know if you noticed that.
Yes, I did, yeah.
But of course, they didn't cook as your vegan cooks. You know, they hadn't seen these kind of dishes. And I remember when Emma, the cook, when you supplied the first list, we had big trouble to purchase all the fancy ingredients that they normally never use, because they were simply too expensive, and the price of these ingredients almost cut your leg and an arm. Do you remember that?
We were like,
so after a while, the cooks started to work together, and we have. So food is very important, because Mongolia has a reputation of having the worst food in the world, but that's not true. It was true in the beginning when everything collapsed. It has a very traditional foods. It's not gastronomy really. It's herders food, like Viking age food, if you like. But we have our cooks that have the privilege to work with your cook. They work together. And cross-fertilization happened. And in May every year, we have a competition with our cooks. We have maybe 10, 12 cooks working for us. And then they would compete. And me, as one of the directors, we would taste and judge with the winners and so on. So we did an event of that. And all the skill sets that your team brought in, because yoga we couldn't have done without your skill set. So we have been able to just develop our business as well, working with people like you and different kind of challenges that we are exposed to as an inbound tour operator, and also including myself. I formed 360 Degrees Mongolia because the requests became more and more advanced, and I ended up doing trip design for specialty trips rather than running the company. So now we have separate entities for that. So it's an amazing experience. I've come to experience working consistently in one country for 25 years. It's almost 30 years now. Evolving with the society itself, because whole of Mongolia is also globalizing and detaching itself from socialism, and it's a democratic country now, and it's developing in its own ways, I would think. And another thing that we thought about in the under tourism and so on, and over tourism, of course we have to be careful with over tourism. There can be over tourism also if we go and view snow leopards. You don't need crowds like in Barcelona and Venice. You can do damage with very few people. So that's a very important aspect. But I would like to say that the biggest problem of today with tourism is that we have under tourism. Is that there's so many places around the world which have no tourism. And when you come to these places, and we have some of them in Mongolia, you would find that young people and young females, they would move to the cities. And the traditional livelihoods becomes, they are not competitive with the global businesses. So in Mongolia, for example, 25 years ago, there were 20 to 23 million head of livestock. Now there is 70 million head of livestock because of the introduction of market economy. So that is not sustainable. So a traditional livelihood can also become unsustainable. It's the same in the Amazon forest. You have more slash and burn economies there now compared to old times, because you have more people, and then it becomes unsustainable. So many rural areas in the world, they need to diversify as the world trade becomes globalized, and they need tourism. So you have no successful conservation projects anywhere in Africa, I think, where there are no tourists, because it's not profitable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is also something that we in the private sector can do. We can expand our business to less visited places, and you can always find an excuse to go to the second or third most famous places. And that is what I did in Mongolia. We didn't concentrate on the most famous places. We went to the second and third good places. And as you know, it's good enough, isn't it?
Yes.
Right.
Oh my God. More than good enough. But
Yeah.
I think this is something that I also feel very passionate about. You know, I've kind of set up Reclaim Yourself, that we try and go to kind of wilderness, more remote places. So I feel that there's a positive impact that travel can have if you go to a less visited place. But then when you go there, the way that you work is very important. So I think that's the same message you're saying, that if we want to do more regenerative and sustainable travel in the future, travel is needed if it's done in the right way. And part of that is going to places that are not over touristed. Yeah.
The challenge is, though, that if we are very professional with marketing, we will have visitors. And there comes a point that we have to kind of stop the flow.
Yeah.
So each destination actually would benefit from having a spatial development plan. I mean, a land use plan which involves tourism. So you have a certain number of beds, especially in fragile habitats. And it's easy to do if you understand tourism dynamics, to add it to a land use plan. But in most places where we work, and certainly not in Mongolia, there isn't such plans. We have to be responsible ourselves, but there are only limits as to much we can do. So it's a tricky balance in some places.
Yeah. But we have to play our part, don't we? Look,
Yes.
we could talk for hours, and we often do, but I think that our time is almost up. So I'm just going to say thank you so much for the conversation. I hope that it has given our audience some interesting things to think about. I'm sure we can leave our contact details if anyone would like to have any further conversations. I certainly would like to sit and have dinner with you somewhere that's not stuck in my flat in London in lockdown one day.
Yes.
Continue the conversation. And I hope that we will be back in Mongolia next year, maybe even this year. But thank you so much for your time, Jan. It's really nice
Thanks,
to
Jools.
see you. And yeah, thank you very much.
It's always good to talk with you.
It's always
and everybody
good to talk
else.
with you too. Take care.
Yeah, bye-bye.